Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Anywhere Uni live podcast. Tonight, I don't have one guest. I have the chance to have two guests with me. They are both from Kiel University in the UK. And tonight, we're going to talk about medical schools, applying to medical schools, and the experience in medical schools in the UK. So tonight, I'm with Sarah, who is working for the university. She's one of their university representative. And then we have Emily, who is a current medical student at Kiel University. Good evening to both of you.
Hiya, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Hi, evening.
Hi, Emily. Right, so it's lovely to have you both. It's going to be great to have the perspective of someone from the university side in terms of maybe the technicalities of the admission process, and then to have also the experience of a student. Even if Sarah told me that, Emily, you're also part of panels when students have their medical interview. You are sometimes also part of that panel.
Yeah, so I'm one of the student interviewers on the panel. They encourage quite a lot to have students on the panel because they feel that we know what would make a good medical student. So yeah, I've been doing that for the past year now, and I'm going to carry it on for this year as well.
That's great. So you can see both sides of, when you applied and now you're on the other side of the table, which is very exciting. And I can't wait to talk about that in a minute. All right. So before we start, I'm not sure if everyone is aware and familiar with Kiel University, which is a very well-known university, very well-established university in the UK. So Sarah, could you give us a quick intro to Kiel University as an institution?
Yeah, absolutely. So for people that are in Europe, we sometimes get mistaken for Kiel in Germany, but we are not in Germany. We're in the UK. And we are a large campus university that's actually celebrating its 75th anniversary this year. So as you mentioned, well established and been running for a long time. As I mentioned, we're a large campus, so we're actually one of the biggest campuses in the UK, but we do have a mid-sized student community, which really does form this kind of, and I'm hoping Emily agrees with me, a very kind of community feeling within the campus that makes students feel very welcome and very homely. We offer a huge range of courses. The main thing for us is that we're in between Birmingham and Manchester, so we're very well located, easy to get around the UK and travel around. We're right next to a city as well, so you can still access all those facilities. But in terms of courses, we pretty much offer everything apart from architecture and engineering. And our specialisms really are in kind of healthcare and medical courses. So it's good that we're here to talk to you about those programs today in particular, because that's where our specialisms lie.
Yeah, that's definitely where I think the first time I heard about Kiel was through the medical school. But you're a larger university, so there's also lots of other programs that students can explore if Kiel is of interest to them. Great, thank you very much, Sarah. All right, so let's talk about specifically the medical application process. We just passed the deadline for our current grade 12. So in the French system, it's terminal students, year 13. The deadline went on October 15th. So it's a whole different world of application. It's not the same as applying to psychology or applying to history. Medical schools are in a really different, it's a different system.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure Emily can talk a little bit more about her experience from her side, but within the UK, we have basically two deadlines that we work with. We have one that is set specifically for medicine, veterinary medicine and dentistry, and also Oxford and Cambridge. And then we have a different deadline that is set for students that are looking to do other programs or outside of Oxford or Cambridge. Now, that deadline is actually kind of an equal consideration deadline, but the problem with those courses like medicine and vet medicine and things like that is that they're extremely popular. So we might be able to say, for example, in psychology, take a student after the deadline that we've set, because we can take more applications, but we're always got high demand for medicine, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so that deadline is very firm within the UK. You do have to meet that. And I'm sure for some of you that feels incredibly early because it is almost a year in advance of applying to your main course. But yeah, absolutely, we do have quite a different system. I mean, I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit about how you found the preparation, because I'm guessing that for you it was probably a little bit earlier and probably a shock to the system coming back from the summer, going straight into an application.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because it is so much earlier, I kind of started my application before the summer holidays, and throughout the summer holidays was mostly writing like the personal statement and gathering all the information needed to apply. And it was very different because at my high school, I was the only one that applied for medicine. So all my friends didn't have to worry about this until later on in the year, and it seemed to just be me kind of just applying on my own. So I definitely relied a lot on the support of teachers and also the support from Keel, like asking questions about deadlines and when to apply and have I done this correctly, and the UCAS system as well. So yeah, it's very different, and it does feel very sudden when you come into your final year and you've only got a matter of weeks or a month until you really need to start applying.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip for students not to be afraid to reach out to the university. Sometimes they feel like they can't, but they should. And, depending on the period, the universities might take more time to answer than other periods. But I think it's always great to reach out. So, Emily, can you tell us a bit more? Are you in what year of med school are you currently in?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit complicated at the moment. So I'm actually intercalating. So I finished my first 4 years of medical school.
Okay.
I finished that in July this year. And then I'm basically taking this year out with permission of the med school to go and do a master's. So that's what I'm doing this year. And then I'll rejoin 5th year next September for my final year.
So, in masters in what?
So it's in cell and tissue engineering. So I'm doing a research master's in the use of nanofibers to regenerate spinal cords after injury.
Very nice. And so yeah, I'm sure you have a vision to kind of combine all this with your future position as a doctor and having that master's and that expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely helping me see sort of the other side, the research side of the things that we then will implement in the future within medicine. And it's nice to be involved in that process of hopefully creating something that can really help patients down the line to, revolutionize their life after they've had such severe injuries.
Very nice. So let's start with the basics, because even before students apply in their final year, they have to make the right choices in terms of courses, right? They can't apply to med school if they are studying as their main subjects, let's say English literature, history, and economics. That wouldn't work. So at Keele University and in most universities in the UK, what would you say are the main subjects that students need to study in their final 2 years of high school in order to be eligible?
Yeah, so I mean, from Keel's perspective, we're quite unique actually. So we actually ask students to have biology or chemistry and then additional science. So that means that students could, for example, do chemistry and psychology, or they could do biology and mathematics, as long as they have either biology or chemistry. I would say, however, that a large proportion of medical schools in the UK are looking for students to have biology and chemistry. So normally we would recommend that you take both if you can, because that would be the kind of preferred option in terms of if you're looking for multiple choices. But there are other universities that will have a bit more of a flex within that. So it's worth having a research to understand where you want to go, probably way in advance of looking if you are looking to come to medicine in the UK, before you then decide what you're going to take for your back, because that will really help you, or your equivalent, because that will really help you decide which the right pathway is, and making sure you have access to the right courses. I'm guessing, Emily, you might have done biology and chemistry as well. Yeah, so that would be a worthwhile consideration.
Yeah, so you would say in the French bac system, that would be because students have 3 specialties in grade 11, and then in the final year, they can only keep 2. So that would be ideally your biology and chemistry, so SVT and physics chimie in the French system. And that's what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, basically, preferably. So, like I said, for us, it could
Yeah.
be 2, but like I would always, whenever I speak to any students, I always say I would recommend taking biology and chemistry, because most students would do that, and most like a good chunk of universities are asking for both of those. So it would be your safer option in terms of having all your doors open if you're looking to come to the UK.
Yeah, well, it's good to know that some universities in the UK, if students do their research, could be flexible with students that have a slightly different academic profile.
Yeah.
Do you have that rule? Because I know it's something I discovered, I didn't know right away, is that some medical schools ask for students to be 18 on the first day of the course. Is that the case at Keele University?
So we don't ask for it on the first day of the course, but we do ask for it for the 1st of October of the year that the student is starting. So it's pretty much a week or two in. Again, like every university will publish that information on their website, and if you can't find it, it's really worth digging for it. But just to give a bit of clarity as to why that happens, it's multiple reasons. At Keele, the predominant reason is that we actually have a dissection suite on campus, which has a huge amount of admin behind it. And in order for students to be able to access that anatomy suite and work with those kind of bodies that have been donated to science, the students do need to be 18 as part of our kind of legal paperwork alongside that. So that's why we have that deadline set, so that those students we don't have any kind of logistical issues with students that are accessing that course that then can't do the work that's required. But yeah, different universities again will have different rules. The majority that I know of do have a kind of you have to be 18 by a certain date rule. And again, that's to do with safeguarding in the UK. So when you're going on placements or practicals or things like that, there's quite a lot of legal stuff around making sure that patients are safe, and also that the people that are delivering the care are safe as well. So yeah, that's kind of why that rule exists. So for us, it's the 1st of October, but again, it's definitely worth having a look around, because some people might get exposed to that a little bit later on in the medicine program, whereas we're quite quick with that sort of thing.
All right. And so if we're talking to you, it means that international students are eligible to apply to medical programs. There's many countries around the world where you have to be a citizen of the country to be able to study medicine. In the UK, if you're not a British resident, are there any specific rules, any cap on numbers? Like, how does it work for international students that want to join the medical school in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So the majority of medical schools, and to be clear, the majority, so when I'm talking like, I think there's something like 24 medical schools in the UK, roughly 22, 21 of those will have a cap on how many international students they're able to take. And that cap is roughly 7% of their total number of students that they accept. So obviously, if you do the math, the schools that you go to that will have larger medical schools will have a bigger proportion of international students. That does put us at a slight advantage, because we are a smaller medical school. So we only unfortunately can take 10 international students, because we have 167 seats. So that means that the 7% is 10 seats. But there are other universities in the UK that have 400 medicine students and therefore can take a lot more. There are also a couple of universities in the UK that have what's called a private medical school within their institution, and that means that actually they're allowed to take the majority as international students. I'm sure you can help some students with some examples of those in the background, but there are definitely a couple of examples of that. So there are some that you might have better odds for example, because they are taking the majority of students as international. But the majority of universities are in a position where they can only take a certain amount of international students per year. But in terms of any other kind of criteria, absolutely not. So they can come from any country. There's no kind of restrictions on any of that side of things. It's just a number.
Well, it's a great tip to look at all that before you decide. Another rule that is very clear is UCAS, which is a portal to apply to UK universities, allows students to apply to 5 different courses. And if you apply to medical schools, so we said the deadline is earlier on October 15th, and it's only 4 medical schools that you can apply to. What would you say is your tip on the 5th choice? Like, what can students put if they are writing a personal statement, which is that motivational letter that you're going to write towards medicine and not towards a specific university, because that same personal statement is submitted to everyone. So students that would choose 4 medical schools, what would be that 5th choice? Like, how can they decide, or can they pick anything, or does it have to be kind of somewhat related to medicine?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm definitely going to call on Emily in a moment for this, but I think there's a few things that I'll just point out to begin with. So just so that you know, that 4 cap is purely because medicine is so competitive in the UK. So it's to give you the option of having a course that's slightly easier to get onto, so that you do have something as a fallback as part of the process. I would say that most students that are applying to medicine are looking for programs for their 5th choice, like biomedical or biotechnology or biochemistry, or something that's really related to health or medicine, that when you write that personal statement, they almost apply to both. And it can make their lives a little bit easier, but also gives them access to still that health medicine area. So those students will be looking at that. as you did mention, those students are only allowed to write one personal statement for all of their choices. Some universities do have a little bit of flex, so they might say, well, actually, we know you're going to apply to medicine, so you can submit a different personal statement in the background, but the majority won't do that. So I think when you're writing your personal statement, you do just need to be a little bit cautious. That being said, we do know that students that are applying to biomedical are also applying to medicine. So we're not put off by reading a personal statement that seems a bit geared toward medicine, because we do understand that the students will be doing that. Emily, I don't know if you wanted to expand a little bit on your side, because obviously you will have put your fourth choice. So I don't know your fifth choice. So I don't know what you put, and also how you went about writing your personal statement to make sure it catered for both.
Yeah, so I completely agree with what you said. So most students that I speak to do choose like the biomed route, either because it's heavily linked with healthcare, or because as a postgrad you can then apply for postgrad medicine and it sets you up nicely for that. I personally applied for a course called Cancer Sciences, that was more of a research course into treatments for different types of cancer, which kind of linked into like this year. I was very interested in research, so I had that as a kind of backup plan. In regards to my personal statement, my advice from the school I went to was just, they know you're applying for medicine as well, very similar to what you said, Sarah. So just write your personal statement for applying to medicine, and that course, the additional course that you're applying for, will understand that that's what you're mostly applying for, and they'll be absolutely fine reading that, and they'll, you know, take that into consideration.
All right. So, Emily, outside of we'll talk about the UCAT test a bit later, but outside of that UCAT test, how did you prepare? You said you started writing your personal statements before the summer of your final year. What else did you do? When did you know that you wanted to apply for medicine? How early did you know? And what did you do between that time where you decide, okay, I'm going to apply for medicine, and the time you applied? What else, except being a good student and picking the right subject in the right courses, what else did you do to prepare?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of knew I wanted to apply for medicine around about 13 or 14. So just as I became a teenager, I was like, this is, I think, what I want to really do. So to prepare, I sort of knew that you need kind of a little bit of work experience. And when they say work experience, I think a lot of people panic and think, I need to be in a hospital or I need to be in a GP. But it's more about having some sort of social interaction with people in the community and how you're able to communicate with them. So I was quite fortunate. I did one placement. I did 1 week in school during one of my school holidays. I managed to arrange that. And then I did a week in the hospital, and those were kind of my 2 weeks of official work placement. But on the side, I also volunteered in the community. So my local church has a flower club, so they do the flowers for the church service. So I was involved in helping there, helping the church community, you know, any elderly person in the community that needed shopping. So I'd go and do their shopping for them or with them, and that kind of thing. And it wasn't a massive amount, you know, just half a day a week or something for about 6 to 8 weeks maybe. Just something to say that I've been able to communicate with these different groups of people, and this is what I've learned from that experience.
And the care aspect, right, is to be in a position where you care for others and you're able to listen, to empathize, and all these kind of skills that go with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. And so outside of that, these, and as you said, I think it's great that you said that, you don't have to find that amazing internship into the best surgery in the country, or with a GP, which are difficult to find when you're that young. So as long as you put yourself out there and have these kind of experiences, it's great. Outside of these, did you particularly read the British medical journals, or did you read research papers? Did you feel like you nourished that interest towards medicine more on the academic level?
Yeah, so I suppose I was quite different in a way. So I never read any academic journals or anything on that side. I went fully down the route of reading books. So there's an author, Adam Kay, who probably a lot of people know, who did a book like This Is Going to Hurt. So if you read a couple of them books, it tells you all about his career as a doctor and the kind of stories. It's been made into a TV series, so if you're more of a TV series person, that works for you as well. Also, any medical programs. I mean, we have one linked to Kiel's Hospital, which is 999 critical condition, but anything like that or similar in France, where it's kind of filming in A&E and documentaries and that kind of thing. That's kind of the route I went down, and they're quite happy for you to discuss that as kind of how you've decided that that's the career for you. But equally, if you're more into reading the journals and that kind of more news article kind of things, then absolutely that also helps.
Yeah, I think that the goal is to really have a good sense of what a doctor's role and mission in life is, and understanding the challenges and to be able to express that, I guess, both in the personal statement and then later on in the interview.
Yeah.
All right, great. So let's talk about that infamous UCAT, and now it's the only medical test for any medical school in the UK. So can you maybe, Sarah, present the test briefly, and then we'll ask Emily, how did she prepare for that test?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just a sort of I don't really know how to explain it, but it's more of kind of a kind of skills test that's completely independent to the universities, and it's ran as kind of a way for us to basically see how these students will handle different scenarios and different questions that they're given as part of that scenario. The marking is bizarre and not anything that I don't think anyone can really understand, but basically the students can get up to around 3,200-ish in the markings, but most students are going to get somewhere around somewhere between, I would say, 2,200 to 2,800. Anyone that's getting 2,900 plus are like wonder children. But that's kind of what happens within that. We often recommend, and I'm sure Emily's got some really good examples of like how she practiced for that test, but the main thing to just really know for that is that because of the competitiveness of medical schools within the UK, you're only actually allowed to sit that test once every cycle. So if you're going to apply, say, for example, for 2026, you'd only be able to sit it once for your 2026 entry. And if you didn't get a good enough grade to get into any universities at that point, then you would have to then apply next year and then sit that test again as part of the process. Now, loads of universities will be really transparent about the grade that they need. So they'll say you need to get this in this grade, and they'll say, there's parts that are called situational judgment tests, and within that you need to get a certain band within that as well. And some universities will be a bit more vague. So unfortunately, Kiel is slightly more vague on the international side. We like to see what comes in, because actually year on year we can get a really varied group of students in terms of what number comes through. But some universities will be super transparent, and they'll be like, we need 2,800 plus, otherwise we're not interested. So again, whilst you're looking at your entry requirements, it's really worth considering that as well. I don't know if you wanted to touch on, Emily, a bit about how you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what's great with that test, at least, is that students get their results as they sit the test, so they can decide with the predicted grades. So predicted grades are these grades that are the prediction on how you're going to achieve on your final exam in the final year. And so the combination of the predicted grades and your UCAT scores, that will give you if you do your research, that's going to give you a good sense of where you could be likely to get an interview. So at least that's an extra, if you're exactly as you said, like if a university says, we're only interviewing students above 2,800, there's no point to apply if you're much lower than that. So that at least that can help students to decide which four they're going to keep at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, as you touched on, most students would sit that exam, or you would sit that exam in the summer before you apply. So basically, if you're going to come in 2026, you'd apply in October 2025, and you'd sit the exam in the summer of 2025. So you're going to get your results straight away, which really does help you. And as you mentioned, with the grades, and I'll just touch on this so that you do actually kind of emphasize that, but whatever medical school you look at within the UK, there is no give on grades. So if you're one grade 10 and you're back out, you're not getting in. If you're 1 point below on the UCAT, you are not getting in. So it does really give you a good kind of understanding. Like you said, if you're applying with predicted grades, things can go wrong a little bit later on. But with your UCAT, you have a set grade and you know exactly where you stand. So you can make sure that you're applying to the right places when you do that.
All right. So Emily, how did you go about the UCAT? How did you prepare? How did you handle it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I will say it's a very different exam to any exam I'd ever sat before. And I think the main difficulties in it are the time constrictions. Each section itself isn't too complicated, but it's the fact that you're only given about 15 seconds a question and you've got to really just look, know the answer and move on. So I say that was the main challenge. So I prepared basically through doing practice papers and there's question banks. If you go on the UCAT official website, they're all there available for you to access. And there's question banks for each of the 5 sections, and then various practice papers. I believe there's about 4 or 5 practice papers. And it's really just going through those. There are other resources as well online. If you just type in UCAT practice questions, there's a lot of resources of replicas. What I did first was the unofficial replicas that other people have produced online. I did them as a starter, and then as I got closer to the date, I used the more UCAT official resources to just double check that I was, able to do exactly what's coming up in the exam. I timed it. It's also important to time the exam quite well. So there is a window, I believe, of several months that you can take the exam. Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong. So I sat mine in August, towards the end of August. So that meant that my summer holidays, I could, as well as writing my personal statement, I revised for the UCAT, and it was over and done before I started my new term in September. So it just kind of took the stress off. I wasn't trying to go to school at the same time as revising for this exam. But I would say I think I revised for about 4 to 5 weeks. Some people do longer, some people do shorter. It really depends on you and how you're finding each of them sections.
Yeah, but I think that's a great tip that I always give to my students is please register early and take the test. Ideally, before you go back to school. The final year is very intense. This is when you're going to have to also make an impression to get the predicted grades that are going to be strong enough, and your teachers are going to bombard you with work and their own expectations, and your own agenda on preparing for university application is not quite their problem. So use that summer, and if you are serious about medical school, it is super selective, as Sarah mentioned already. So that summer, you have to sacrifice part of that summer for the preparation. All right. So if we talk a bit more quickly about the personal statement, we're not going to do a full session on what the personal statement is, but is that a role? Does it play a role into getting selected for an interview, or is it just predicted grades and the UCAT score, and then the personal statement is just something that maybe is used during the interview, or is it something that can also is also part of the process to even getting an interview?
Yeah, again, it completely depends on the university. As it happens, and handily for you, I've worked at 2 different universities that offered medicine, and they are both very different. So I can talk through what I've seen on either side. So obviously, I'll talk through Keele first. So as an institution, we're actually a little bit more holistic than a lot of other universities. And so the personal statement plays a really big part in our selection process, actually. For students that did want an idea of what to include, we've got a guide on our website. So you can literally search in Google Keele Uni personal statement guide. And there's a PDF document that will come up with some tips on what to include. Like, for example, the main thing for us is actually linking into the NHS values. So can you prove that you've done things that link into those NHS values that we're looking for from students? But yeah, for us, what would happen is the students would submit their predicted grades, as you mentioned, their UCAT, and we'd also be looking at their grade 10 equivalents as well. And once they've met all of those minimums, we actually almost just push those aside. So they've passed the first test, but we're not including them as part of the assessment. And we would then look at the UCAT and the personal statement together to decide whether we want to interview someone. So the personal statement for us really plays an important part in that pre-interview stage. I think we do also kind of pull off on that in the interviews, probably slightly less so because they are kind of multiple mini interviews where it's more situational. But there are things that you can relate to from your personal statement that you'll be able to pull into your multiple mini interview as well when we're asking a bit more about you, for example. As I mentioned, I used to work for a different institution who did not read personal statements. So some universities will you know, if you see them at fairs or anything like that, they'll willingly admit that they don't read the personal statement, and it's more of a formality as part of their process. That being said, I'd always really recommend that you write a solid personal statement and you put the time into it, because if you are being chosen between another student, that is when they will read the personal statement. So if they're torn and they can't decide who to interview, they will read that personal statement, and that will decide whether you get an interview or not. So the emphasis there for me is that even if you're asking university whether they do a personal statement or they read it, you really do still need to write a good personal statement, because when it comes to the kind of the breaking point, that's when they will decide whether that personal statement will really make that decision for them. So and I mean, it also just does help you prepare for the interview, because you're really kind of getting that content ready for about why you want to study medicine and the motivations and all that sort of stuff as well. So yeah, it's really worthwhile making sure that personal statement is solid.
All right. So before we dive into the interview, any tip either from Emily, Sarah, or the tip, because you've mentioned a few already, on the personal statement to help guide students towards what they should be trying to create with that piece of writing?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Emily?
Go on then, I can. So one of the tips that I was given was make your first opening statement of your personal statement very bold and very something to like almost grab their attention. So if they are reading your personal statement, they're like, I'm involved in this. I want to read all of it. So definitely that first line, whatever you decide to write, make it something a little bit punchy, something that, you know, really draws them in. And I think something I would say as well is, whilst it's important to discuss, like we mentioned, about like the academic side of yourself and what kind of, you know, if you've read anything else in your work experience and that kind of thing, do also include a little bit about you as a person. So what kind of hobbies do you have? Like, what do you do in your spare time? Because I think a lot of universities like to see that you're quite a well-rounded person, so that although medicine is very important and will be a very important part of your life for a very long time, you need to have something else on the side that's going to give you a little break from medicine. So like for me, I dance ballet and I'm in an orchestra, I play the violin. So just a little mention of that on the side of this is what I like to do, just tells them that you're quite well-rounded and you have got other hobbies on the side.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so obviously I've touched on the fact that we have a guide. UCAT also have a really handy guide on personal statements as well. So if you just wanted to get some ideas of like how to structure it, I have to massively agree with Emily. I'm sure you can imagine we're reading thousands of personal statements, and the amount of times we read, I want to study medicine, because it's really boring. So if you can try and come up with something a bit more inventive, and I know that's really challenging, but if you can, that will really help us kind of get to grips with you and really read that with a lot of interest as well. But yeah, I'd really read that guide. Emily did touch on the kind of extracurriculars as well, just to say that we are quite different in the UK to the US. So the US will often have very strong extracurricular demand, whereas in the UK it's more of a quick mention of the things that you do and why that might make you a good student. So for example, are you a team player? Are you able to listen well? Those sorts of things, they're a good thing to mention in that sort of context. And the majority would be the focus on the kind of academic side, whether that's what you do in your spare time to show the interest in your subject, whether that's what you study as well. But yeah, those would be my main tips. But you do only have one page, so you've got to really kind of cut the fluff and really kind of focus on what you need to say within that.
All right, great. All right, so let's dive now into the interview. So the students, they've been doing experiences that are going to be helping them build their profile and also help them really decide if medicine is for them or not. And they're going to prepare for the UCAT test, and they're going to write a strong personal statement with an amazing opening. And now they're invited for the interview. Amazing. So how do you prepare for that interview? What kind of interviews can you face? What can you tell us about that final step?
Yeah, I'm happy to do a really quick overview of the UK, and then I'll pass over to Emily to her experience. But for me, the majority of universities are now doing what's called multiple mini interviews, which is basically within an interview setting, you'll get basically quick 5-minute scenario questions. You'll move around. So on our situation, we actually have a panel that you do it online with, but at some universities, when you do it in person, you'll move around and you'll essentially go, well, this zone is around ethics and this zone is around you as a person, and you'll move around and answer these questions in these different scenarios. and you'll meet different people as you're doing it. So on our panel, Emily actually is on our panel, as we touched on earlier. We'll have, you know, actual doctors on the panel. We'll have people that are pretending to be patients on the panel. So you'll get kind of a really good idea of what that is. There are some universities that still do a traditional panel, which is basically that they just sit like you would expect in a job interview, and they just sit and ask you questions. But those are few and far between in the UK now. So the majority of universities are working on this practice. Emily, given that you deliver some of those those kind of interviews that we deliver, and also that you've been on the other end, how have you kind of found that from your side?
Yeah, so going back to when I was sort of a student and I was on, you know, that side of things, most of mine, like you mentioned, were multiple interviews. I had one that was a panel of the universities, and actually, it is a very stressful experience to be sat there in front of someone, you know, you've never met before. You've got 5 minutes to impress them, and it's kind of yes or no. But I will say that, you know, it's almost a friendly experience as well. So everyone will be really quite nice to you. I feel like I'm quite a nice interviewer. I hope I make you comfortable if I ever, you know, interview any of you. So I'd say, although it's stressful, you know, don't worry too much. And my top tip as a student would be, if you're given material in advance, because some universities say, please could you read this, or please could you look at this, do actually do that. That's my top tip. Please do actually read the material we give you if we've asked you to, or if we've asked you to look into something. What do I look for when interviewing? I would say that we tend to emphasize that the patient is most important. So in any of those scenarios that you're given where what would you do or that kind of thing, just think about the patient. And I look for students that are friendly, they interact well with me, good social interactions and caring. And I would say as well, with your answers, be genuine in the moment. Sometimes you can kind of tell that someone's just regurgitating a pre-written answer, because you can kind of half predict what you're going to get asked in a medicine, you know, like what made you choose medicine, and they'll start spieling off like this 5-page essay they've written. Don't do that. Just be in the moment and just, you know, answer genuinely as yourself.
It's a very good tip. Especially nowadays, even in essays, being genuine in the era of AI is very, very important.
Yeah, for sure. And just to kind of emphasis on that, I think at Kiel in particular, I'd almost say that if you got an answer wrong, as long as you were sure that you kind of went in with commitment and you were friendly and you were approachable within that scenario, that almost would become less important that you got it wrong. And it's more important that you were the right kind of person within answering that question, that you made the decision and that you were committed to it, you were happy with it, and that you were friendly and approachable within that scenario. Because ultimately we're going to teach you the science. We'll teach you all the stuff that you need to know. We'll teach you how to be a doctor. We don't expect you to know how to be a doctor right now. And it's very much more about that you're the right person to be a doctor. So really emphasizing those kind of personal skills as part of that.
So how does the interview places in the process? Is it like you've passed every stage and then the interview is going to be yes or no, you have an offer? Or is it the interview is going to get a grade and then the committee is going to look at everything again, the predicted grades, the personal statement, the UCAT, the interview, and then decide on who gets an offer based on everything?
Most universities will ignore everything once they get to the interview stage. So everything that's happened before, it's done, and your interview is your kind of next stage. Once you pass that,
Yep.
you'll get a conditional offer essentially, which relies on your grades once you get them in grade 12.
All right, great. Thank you very much. One question before we dive a bit into the experience of being a medical student in the UK, on tuition fees for international students. They're very high. Everyone is aware of that. So can it be very different from a university to another, or is every medical school kind of fees similar for international students? Are there any scholarships? Like what's the picture for an international student looking at medical school in the UK?
Yeah, so they are very high. Our medical kind of course fees are around £47,500 a year, and it's a 5-year course, so they are incredibly high. I would say the majority of students are sitting around that sort of, majority of universities are sitting around that sort of figure. So they'll be somewhere between £40,000 and £50,000. That doesn't mean that there aren't some that are a lot higher, and I'm sure you can imagine insert gap here which institutions might be charging a little bit more. But yeah, unfortunately, I would say from the kind of scholarship perspective, unfortunately, the majority of the students or universities wouldn't offer a scholarship because, as I'm sure you can imagine, we've got 10 international spaces for the world. And so unfortunately, it's relatively easy for us to find 10 students that can afford those fees and that will also meet the entry requirements as well. So some universities will have something, and it's really worth researching. It's also worth researching within France or with whichever country you're in, because you might be able to find some scholarships that are independent from the university and that can support your studies as well. But yeah, we would normally say to most students that are considering medicine that you need to have that money yourself, or consider being sure that you have that money yourself, and being aware that also that is just your tuition fee. So you also need like living costs and everything else on top of that as well.
Yeah. And so for an international student looking at training in the UK, what kind of recognition? So maybe I'm not asking you to know for every country around the world, what would the recognition be, but can a international student train in the UK then cross and practice elsewhere, like in the EU, in France, in Morocco, or is it really just in the UK and the transfer to another country is difficult?
Yeah, so I think it depends country to country. As I'm sure you can imagine, UK education is well regarded. So generally speaking, you can take that to other countries. And obviously, a lot of our international students will go either back home or to another country to continue their medicine. The main thing you just need to consider is that when you study medicine in the UK, because it is a 5-year program, you're obviously not a specialist when you finish that course. And there's a whole kind of system in place within the UK around foundation years and things within the kind of healthcare system that would then allow you to specialize once you finish. So you just need to be really cautious of, like, if you're going to leave the UK to go back to your home country or wherever you're going, can you then continue that specialization program in that country to progress in that way?
Yeah. All right. That's great. So let's talk about the experience itself. And Emily, I'm going to turn to you. How different is it from your high school sixth form experience? What's kind of the week of a first year medical student? Does it really change from year to year? Like, what can students expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the first month when I came to medical school, it was a month of almost like, what have I done? It's very intense. I was like, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to cope? And it is very, very different to sort of school studies. Kind of you're in at school, I was anyway, my classroom was a classroom of about 15 or 16 students. You're now in a lecture theatre of about 160. So it is very different in that kind of respect. And the workload is a lot more niche in a way. So before you're studying quite a few different subjects, now you're just doing medicine and everything that kind of involves. But it's okay, you kind of get into it. And one thing I would say is don't be afraid to ask for help. If they've said something and you don't understand in the lecture theatre, just put your hand up, don't be afraid, or email the lecturer afterwards. Everyone, from my experience at Kiel, is super friendly, super wanting you to learn. So they're really happy to help. Throughout the years, so for me, my first year was a COVID year, so I joined in 2020. So that was very different to what you guys would experience. So it was a lot of online learning. But years 1 and year 2 were mostly lectures, dissections and labs, with a few placements at GP or the hospital and that kind of thing. And you do get into a role. The next big change, I would say, is third year. That's your first placement year. And that, again, your first month of that, you've just gotten used to the first 2 years. Your first month of that is, what have I done? I don't know what I'm doing. You're back to that stage again because you're in the hospital, you're with the doctors. They're asking you questions that you think, I don't know what you're on about. But again, that only lasts for a couple of weeks, and then you get into a role. And by the end of fourth year, I felt quite comfortable and confident in like a working environment and on the ward. And I'm sure fifth year will just build on that even further. So you do get there.
And how competitive is it to get into specialties afterwards? Like, is there very strict numbers and you need to be placed? Is it like a national placement ranking for students to choose their specialty if they want to be a surgeon, a psychiatrist, or?
Yeah, so like Sarah mentioned, so when I graduate first, I'll have to do my junior doctor years. So that's the Junior Doctor Foundation program, and you're randomly allocated a place within the country to go, and it's a hospital. You do your 2 years, And that's what gets you your license. So basically, when you graduate, you don't have your license to practice, you're put on a temporary license. But once you've got your license, that, from my understanding, I don't know much, is kind of when, if you want to, as an international student, you could slightly move to other countries if there were training programs available because you have your license. After then, you choose, you apply for your specialty program, so you decide what you kind of want to do. And it really depends on the specialty and where you want to do it as to how competitive it is. I believe there are charts by the GMC and the BMA that are released about how many people apply for each position, depending on the specialty and where it is. Some of those specialties, it's like 50 odd people are applying for one position.
Wow.
So you kind of have to, it's about 15 for every one position, but you're in kind of a similar situation statistically to getting into medical school all over again. I think when I applied to medical school, it was like 12 people applied for every one position. I believe it's now even more competitive than that. So it's kind of like starting that all over again. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and just to add really quickly, I think the location is probably an important part of that. I can imagine that if you're in certain cities or certain parts of the country, that will get more competitive compared to other places as well. So if you're willing to be flexible on where you're based, then that would have an effect on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Big cities, particularly London. London is very, very competitive. So yeah, if you're not too bothered about where you are, you can get an equally good placement and equally good experience in it, just somewhere a little bit more rural and not a major city.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I think, medical school is competitive enough as it is, and often international students, they only know London, they dream about London, so they're all like, oh, I'm going to apply to all the big London universities, and I think the odds are not necessarily the best, and they can look at UCAT scores and the predicted grades and decide for themselves, but I think it's always good to look a bit further out and maybe at universities that didn't know yet and that have like the quality of the programs across the country, I think are super strong. So they don't have to worry about that.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right. Perfect. One final question, and I want to open it to if there's any question in the room. Are there any programs in the UK for kind of like a foundation year for medicine? Like, so I know we use that term for something else, but in terms of after high school, where international students could transition before getting into med school, or do you have to just go straight in and just
Yeah, no, they definitely exist. I would just say apply with caution. So you've got, for example, for us at Kiel, we would actually, for international students, we only take one foundation from within the UK, run through a foundation provider called King's. Otherwise, we would not take any other foundation route. So the student would have to come directly from their BAC or equivalent. Those universities or foundations that are offering that medicine foundation, they also cannot guarantee you a place on medicine because of how competitive it is.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure you can imagine, if they took 100 students, maybe only 10 students would get placed. So just be careful if you are going to look at those. They are a great option if you're still looking to kind of bridge the gap, but just be aware that they might still be as competitive as if you were to apply straight away.
All right, great. Anything else you would like to share before I stop the recording and then we are open to questions?
I just wanted to end by saying, obviously, we've touched on it quite a bit, but if you have any questions related to Kiel in particular, you're more than welcome to ask us at any point. We're a friendly bunch, so you're welcome to get in touch if you wanted to ask anything.
Yeah, and you can go through me and then I'll redirect, or you can go straight directly to the source and ask Kiel for anything. All right, great. Well, Sarah, Emily, thank you so much. It was great to we really covered a lot of grounds tonight, and I even learned a few things that I didn't know yet, so that's great. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you soon on another episode of the Anywhere Uni Live podcast.